Alright, so the next step is to actually start doing some hand sanding and cleaning this blade up. It's got a little bit of discoloration from tempering, and I did give it an initial etch just to see what the pattern looked like. So now it's time to take some sandpaper. I'm starting with 400 grit and give this blade a good sanding, clean everything up, put a nice even finish on it. I'll also take the time now to kind of blend in this secondary edge bevel. You can see there's kind of a little bit of an angle here and kind of varies in thicknesses a little bit, or width I should say. So I'll take this time and kind of blend this area in so it has more of a smooth transition. It won't show up quite as much when I do the final etch on the blade and the final sharpening, but right now I'm just going to sand with some 400 grit sandpaper. The paper I like to use is Rhino Wet Indesia paper. It is an extremely good product, definitely worth the slight amount of extra money it costs to buy this. This paper lasts quite a lot longer while you're sanding. It cuts more aggressively for a longer period, stays sharper longer if you will, and just overall provides much better results from my experience. So I use a little chunk of some nice and flat basically Corian countertop material for a sanding block, for a backing for my sandpaper, and I use some good old-fashioned Windex as some lubricant. So I spray some of that on the blade, on the paper, and then it's basically just going to town with the sanding. Now the initial sanding you can go back and forth like this, but as you get closer to a final sanding, especially if you're doing a nice hand rub finish, you want to sand in one direction only. Nice, smooth, even strokes. You don't want to vary your direction, because this back and forth motion, stopping and starting, creates what are known as hooks, little J hooks in the finish from where you stopped and started, and you can see them in the final finish of your knife. That's always a strong indicator of someone who knows how to do a really superior hand rub finish, and someone who is let's say still learning or someone who doesn't really care as much. You know, there are some makers out there that choose not to take the time to do a really nice hand rub finish on their work, but that's something that definitely distinguishes you know, the makers who know how to do it and those who don't. And it's those little fine details, attention to detail, that really sets certain work apart. So I always try and take a lot of pride in my work, obviously, and always try and do the best hand rub finish I possibly can. But basically right now, just a lot of hand sanding just to pull off all this dark oxides from the etch, from tempering, from hardening. If you didn't use anti-scaling compound, you would be grinding off scale, sanding off scale, everything like that during this process. You'd probably have to start with your grinder and then eventually work your way to hand sanding, but since I use the anti-scaling compound, I don't have nearly as much work pulling off and cleaning up the blades. So I'm not going to sit and videotape this all, because it'll probably take me at least a good half an hour or more to sand this blade and get it up to a good level of finish before doing the final etch on it. But this is basically the process that I use. Typically I have a board or supporting surface underneath the blade, but at the moment it's in a box somewhere, and I didn't feel like taking the time to really dig and find it. But it's better to have some sort of supportive surface under here so your blade doesn't flex. Luckily this blade is really short and pretty rigid, so it doesn't have a lot of movement or flex in it as I'm sanding on it. But otherwise you would certainly want a nice supportive surface under here. Again, I'm not working in the most ideal conditions. Just kind of got the urge to make a knife and didn't want to have to wait to get the shop insulated and finish unpacking everything. So again, it's just a really simple process, time-consuming process of just doing this sanding. Like I said, once I get kind of everything knocked down with a dirty finish, if you will, of the back and forth at a 400 grit, I'll probably jump up to 500, possibly even 600 grit. And once I get up to my final finish, again, I'll stop the back and forth motion and actually do nice smooth strokes, one direction only, so that I avoid any J-hooks. This being a pattern welded blade, you don't have to take your finish quite so far or so nice as you would on a standard hand rub finish, but I like to anyways, just for good practice. You know, when you etch the blade, if there are any small J-hooks or variations in your sanding marks, your actual sanding scratch pattern, if you will, they typically don't show up. But again, it's not something I'd want to find out after etching. So I usually take the extra time, go the extra mile, just to make sure that I do the job right. So I'll check back in after I get both sides of this blade knocked down with sandpaper and closer to the final finish. Alrighty, I've gone ahead and gotten the knife through all of the initial hand sanding and put a pretty nice 400 grit finish on it. Pretty nice hand rub finish. I don't know how well it'll show up in the camera, but nice and even scratch patterns, no J-hooks. Again, being a pattern welded blade, it's not necessarily crucial to get a super nice hand rub finish on it like this, but it's just kind of out of habit that I do things like this. But anyways, now that I've got a really nice finish on this knife, the next step will be to go ahead and start working on getting together the handle components. So the next step will be to start working on the guard. I'm going to do the guard out of some 416 stainless steel. Haven't decided on the handle material yet, but go ahead and put the file guide back on this and just double check and make sure that those shoulders are nice and true and nice and perpendicular, so I get a good solid fit with the guard there. I only took the blade to 400 grit finish at the moment because as I go through and start fitting the guard and fitting the handle and doing these other tasks, it's possible that I'll get some fine abrasions and scratches on the blade. So I leave it at a little bit of a lower 400 grit so that I can use that slightly more aggressive 400 grit paper to pull out any of those fine scratches that might be picked up during the rest of the assembly process before I take it up to a slightly higher grit finish before etching. Typically when I etch, I don't go much beyond say a 600 grit finish. You know, a lot of people, you know, try and swear by, you know, mirror polish your blades if you're going to etch Damascus steel. I actually find that leaving a little bit more of a, I don't want to say rougher finish, but a little bit of a lower grit hand rub finish actually gives you much better results when you're etching your pattern welded steel. You get a little bit more surface area for the etchant to interact with, and the nice sharp scratch pattern from a hand rub finish doesn't wash and blend away your boundaries between your different layers. I found that if you you know, mirror polish and put this on a buffing wheel, you kind of get a more of a muddled looking finish because the buffing wheel kind of smears and washes out the actual grain boundary and distinction between the different layers within the steel, so you don't quite get as sharp or as bold of a contrast when you mirror polish. So I find the hand rub finish works much better for that purpose. But anyways, we'll go ahead and get working on a guard here in a little bit and continue the process with finishing out the blade. Alright folks, I've gone ahead and taken the knife and put the file guide back on it and trued up the shoulders and kind of rounded over these corners here. That way I'll get a nice good fit when I mill the slot for the guard. So again, there's the knife, nice clean finish, ready to go. So the next step will be to start working on the guard. So what I have here is a piece of 4/16 stainless steel. This is 3/8 of an inch thick, 1 inch wide. The 3/8 inch thickness seems to be a pretty decent thickness for most of the guards that I do. You can get some 1/2 inch thick pieces or whatnot for slightly thicker guards, but for the most part the 3/8 inch tends to do a decent job and provide a substantial enough guard for most of what my needs are. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just kind of use my sketch here as a rough estimate for the actual length requirements for this piece. So I'm just going to come in and roughly mark out a rough size for the amount of material I'll need. It's definitely one of those instances where it's okay to leave yourself a little bit of extra material. Some people might look at that as some waste, but in terms of knife making, sometimes having that little extra bit in case something goes wrong, extra material is definitely your friend. So I got a rough mark of the length of steel I'll need for the guard, and I'll go ahead and take this metal cutting bandsaw, cut this piece off, then we'll true up the faces of this on the belt grinder and do the layout for these. Alrighty, so we've got our piece of stainless here for the guard. Not cut particularly square. It's not something really need to worry about. What I'm going to do now is this stainless comes with a little bit of pitting and impressed scale from when it was actually rolled out in a steel mill. So got a nice blaze belt on my grinder here, and I'm just going to quickly knock off this pitting and the scale and give a really nice flat surface so that I can do my layout and milling easier. There we go. Got a nice clean flat surface to go ahead and mill my guard slot in, do all my layout on, and take it over to the mill with an end mill. And so I've got my little piece of stainless here for the guard, and as you notice, I've colored one side blue. You can do that with layout fluid or the poor man's layout fluid, blue Sharpie, or whatever color you prefer. The coloration just helps you see scribed lines a little bit easier. I don't have any layout fluid at the moment, so the Sharpie is what I'm going after for this operation. I've got a pair of calipers here, and I have them set to roughly 0.5 inches, which is half of the width of that block. And I'm just going to use the calipers to scribe myself out a rough center line down this block here. That'll help me line up my end mill when I go to mill the slot into this. So Hopefully you can see that silver line. That'll be the center of the block. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take my knife, and take my calipers here, and measure the exact width of this tang slot right here, and it is 0.620, almost exactly 0.620, 0.621, somewhere in there. So we'll call it 0.620, make it a hair undersize. Next thing I need to do is basically figure out where on the block this tang should penetrate this block of steel. So got my sketch again and have my knife. A quick and dirty method is to just kind of hold the knife up to the sketch and use a little bit of a scribe to kind of scratch in kind of where things should roughly fall. Then I'll come back with the calipers adjusted to the right dimension and locked in place, and use those to mark out the exact width that I want this tang slot to be. I don't know how well those marks are going to show up on the camera, but as you can see, I've got a couple lines and a center line down the middle, and that will represent where the end mill will start and stop, as well as, of course, the center line. The final thing I'm going to do is measure the thickness of my tang, which is 0.191 inches. So the 0.191 inches, if you divide that by 2, which is roughly 0.1 inch, and you add that to the 0.5 inches that we had previously, that will bring the width to roughly 0.6 inches. Now I'm not lining this up exactly as an exact measurement, but this will just be used as a kind of a side width guide, just to also help center that end mill. I'm going to use the center line as the primary guide, but this will certainly help. So now I've got the rough area laid out for where I'm going to mill the slot into this, and I'll go over to the milling machine and cut the slot. Alrighty, I've got the stainless steel block in milling vise, all nice and leveled out. So right now I've got a 3/16 inch end mill, 4 flute in the mill. Now 3/16 is the equivalent of 0.188 inches. My knife blade measures 0.191 in terms of thickness. So I'm going to be approximately 3/1000ths shy of the final dimension with using just a single straight pass on this end mill. That's actually okay. I typically want to mill things a little bit on the small side. That'll ensure a nice tight fit throughout. So right now I've just taken the time to kind of center my end mill in the slot, and I'm just making sure that everything is nice and straight, and that my vise hasn't shifted, which it's definitely fine at the moment. So go ahead and align this at the edge, turn the machine on, and plunge in. Now as I mill this slot, I'm just taking very, very fine cuts. I don't want the end mill to fight too much and walk out on me. So it's just extremely light cuts. Takes a little bit of time to do, but provides a good result in the long run. So I just slowly, pass at a time, nibble away at this material and slowly cut my slot. Alrighty. I've completed the slot. So we'll pull it out and take a look. Looks like we got a nice, clean, and even slot. So the next step will be to start fitting this onto the knife.